Hi everybody and welcome to Bang number 11. Thank you so much to Elizabeth Walker for putting this all together, my great friend. Thank you so much for inviting me to take part, and I'm happy to take part. But first I guess I better play the part. Okay, so let me get the music out here, and I would like to talk through a few things with this piece. So I guess first of all, when I approach any piece of music, whether it's a study or a concert piece or anything like that, I need to make sure that there is a purpose behind it. What is the purpose that I'm trying to seek in that piece of music? And I don't mean, as far as a study goes, I don't mean a technical purpose, like is this study about articulation or is it about breathing or anything like that. I mean a musical purpose, so that what is it that you are trying to say? In my case, I feel like once I have that in mind, the technical aspects of playing, breathing, articulation, fingers, everything, it falls into place much more easily, much more quickly than if I didn't have that specific purpose, that specific thing I wanted to say musically, then my brain is all fuddled and the fingers just fly around doing nonsense. So at least that's something that works for me. Find the purpose first and then move ahead. So in a case of this study, when I play studies, I'd like them to be what I think should be performance ready. I perform studies on the concert stage. I think many of them are really little gems of music, and we need to be able to do that just like pianists do and violinists and everybody else perform their etudes. So in order to do that, we need to find the music that is inside, so that somebody who's not a flute player listening to it will go, oh, isn't that nice? And we're up here thinking, oh, isn't that hard? But musical purpose first, and technical stuff comes to follow that. Now, that goes sort of hand in hand with phrasing and breathing. There's really no good place to breathe in these things, is there? But we can find them. I'm one person that tends to like shorter phrases rather than long ones, and there's a reason for that. I like my music making, if you will, my performance to seem more like a conversation that I'm having with someone, in this case the audience, the listener, rather than I'm lecturing at them. If you listen to speech patterns, and this is what I'm really big on, I think that the music we play has to follow, because it's a form of communication, it has to follow speech patterns, not necessarily singing. I'm much more interested in how we talk to each other, because that's how we communicate, rather than sing. We don't sing to each other. Maybe it would be a nice world if we did. So in thinking about speech patterns, I have noticed that it changes in different languages, definitely. But overall, there are some similarities. For instance, if someone is speaking to you, as I am doing now, or somebody is delivering a speech or a professor in a lecture, that type of thing, we use longer sentences because we have a lot of information to fit in. When someone is speaking with you, on the other hand, in a conversation, a friendly conversation, we use much shorter sentences, and we allow room for feedback, whether it be actual words from the person we're talking to or body language, facial expressions, and so on. This is part of our conversation. So I try and think about that when I'm putting phrases together. How would it sound as speech? And we come up with shorter phrases. Now, of course, that helps with breathing. You don't have to hold your breath so long. But I'm also not a big fan of quick snatch breaths. To me, they always sound artificial, like a quick snatch breath. It sounds uncomfortable, and that makes your listener a little uncomfortable as well. I try as best I can to make it sound as natural as possible. Now, this may mean justifying every breath, so that it's not just taken on the spur of the moment and sounds too spontaneous. It needs to be planned so that it sounds actually like you're supposed to take a breath there. For instance, let's see if I can do some examples. Right in the opening, actually, I'm doing it in 4-bar phrases. And so the breath comes. In order to do that, you have to justify where the breath is. So, etc. If I wanted to do it in one breath, I would have to change the phrase, which emphasis do I put on which notes. Right now I'm putting it on, I think, or I feel like I'm putting it on bar 2 and bar 4, the first notes. And then putting it there, just to give some variety. But if I were to put the emphasis always on one, then that breath to me feels a little unnatural. So where you take your breath will determine how you're going to emphasize certain parts of your phrase. Same as when we're talking. If I wanted to do it all in one breath, I would have to change the emphasis again. Etc. So remember, your breathing is not an Olympic feat. It's just, please don't breathe when you have to. Breathe before you have to. Breathe when the music in your mind and your heart says that now is time for a break. Or else you're going to sound like somebody who's just talking and talking and talking in one long run-on sentence, and it's going to sound really uncomfortable, and your audience is going to think, please breathe, please breathe. It gets very tiring to listen to, and there are various culprits, especially in other instruments who don't need to breathe, that play these incredibly long phrases that make me, anyway, feel very uncomfortable. We don't want our audience to feel uncomfortable. We want them to feel like they're conversing with us. Along the same lines, bar 17, I have here. This is about justifying the breath. So in 17, we can play. To me, that sounds like a study. So I breathe in between 4 bars. Now you see what I did there? I took a quick snatch breath because I was showing you what it's like not to be able to, not justifying that breath. If I want to take a bar in bar 4 without it sounding unnatural, I have to then justify it. And in this case, it starts 2 bars before that. 4 bars before that. Etc. So, in thinking about where to place your breath, you're going to be thinking quite a bit before it as to how do you set it up so that it sounds quite natural. Also, on the last part of bar 65, if you look over the page, depending on your edition, we have this repeated pattern. And I take actually more breaths there, again, not because I need it, but because I'm trying to illustrate a pattern. I'll start a little bit before it, perhaps in bar 61. So what I'm doing there is I'm breathing after in bar 65 and 66. I don't need the breath. Nobody needs that many breaths. But I'm showing the pattern so that it makes musical sense and it doesn't sound like I've just taken a breath because I needed one. Great. How about, let's talk a little bit about rhythm. This is a very, very tricky etude for that. If you're looking closely. It's really important. This is all linked in with tempo too. It's really important in this piece not to play too fast for a couple of main reasons. The first reason being that if you play it too fast, you will not be able to differentiate some of these very small rhythmic differences that occur, and I'll show you what those are. The second reason for not playing it too fast, well, besides that it says allegretto, which, by the way, it's part of your interpretation. You pick your speed of music depending on how it feels in your heart, not because of an instruction on the page, which I can do another aside on while we're at it. I never mark anything in my parts. They're completely clean because I find if I mark anything, I end up following those instead of the soundscape, the overall soundscape. Music lives off the page. So I never put in any marks. Therefore, any marking that a composer has put in has to be justified here first before I can play it. And once it's justified here and in your head and it's internalized, then you actually don't need any of the music at all. Anyway, as an aside, Back to, what were we talking about? Rhythm, right. So we have these 30-second notes at the opening, famous ones. And it always reminds me of a little part in the opera Carmen, actually. You might go look this up, where Carmen is singing her teasing song. It's just la la la, and it goes la 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 la. It's exactly the same thing. So that also sticks in my brain as an earworm, and I end up keeping the tempo quite low, which helps. But here's what I'm talking about. The opening, we have 16th note through 30 seconds. Demi, semi-quavers, and hemi, demi, semi-quavers. If you're in England, sorry. I'll just stick to fractions. And then, further down the page, at bar 23, we have what may sound like exactly the same thing, but is written quite differently. It's now an 8th note, 2 grace notes, which to me says that we want to hear an 8th note, 2 grace notes, not as it is at the beginning. And then further on down in the trio, we have 16th note, 2 grace notes. So we'll go through a bit of those. Hopefully I'll get the differences. And then when we go down to bar 23, so it's much quicker, those grace notes, and we want to hear a longer 8th note. And then down into the trio. By the way, the trio is going to be a little slower, as we do trios. So it's a little more elegant or calm or whatever you want to think about. It's a little slower, which helps in this case for the rhythm. Now, it's very easy to mess this up. So, one of the ways you might end up doing it and not even realizing it, like as a turn, it's not that, right? It's definitely not that. And it's not the first 3 notes fast, and it's not the last 3 notes fast. It is in between, just the grace notes fast. We still need to hear the skeleton of the melody. Okay. So that's part of the 3 differences that you really want to get rhythmically speaking in this piece, and it really it's I don't know, for me anyways, it's impossible to do it if you do the whole thing fast, because then they all blend into each other as dum-dum, and it's just too quick. Oh yeah, and the coda, speaking of tempo and so on, I like to take the coda faster. It's sort of different material, wrapping things up, and in many times, in orchestra and so on, we just take the coda and drive to home. In this case, it's a little bit sneaky because of the little finger gymnastics that you have to do, but it is entirely possible to do with a little bit of practice and patience, definitely. I'll talk about fingerings in a minute, and I'll come back to things I do there. I want to say a little bit about vibrato as well. I tend to keep it going all the way through everything, instead of just putting it on long notes, for instance. That to me sticks out a little bit too much. But of course the speed of it will vary depending on which part and which mood you're trying to, which part of the piece and which mood you're trying to create. But there's a few places that we as flute players often get stuck into a tradition or a habit or whatever, and we don't realize it. Which can really help. So for instance, I wanted to talk about bar in the trio section, in the second section of the trio, bar 54 and 55, where the A is tied over the bar, and a few bars later, the C is tied over the bar. We really need to try and show where the downbeat comes, even though the note is tied over, and we can do that with vibrato. all of a sudden a little shimmer of vibrato will help that. Instead of sitting on it, which to me doesn't really say anything, I still need to hear that downbeat as much as you can. Just to give, your dancer something to dance to. And this brings up another point about sort of rhythms and so on. Never forget what the hierarchy of beats are in a bar. So we're in compound time, so the first beat is always going to be a little more special than the other two. And that goes even for when you have running notes all the way through. We tend to have a habit of just playing everything quite evenly, which is lovely. It sounds nice and legato and so on, but it obscures, to me, it obscures the pulse somewhat. So, for instance, what I just played there, etc. Or let's hear some of the emphasis on beat 1, a little less on 2 and less on 3, etc. And the in-between 16th notes are really not that important. So you can, pick whichever way you like, or a third or a fourth way or anything like that. That's one of the beauties of playing any kind of music, really. You get to decide, but make sure that you have some sort of reasoning behind every decision that you make, and that it sort of makes sense, right? Okay. Oh yes, we were talking about vibrato, keeping it going. Here's, for instance, where can I? We'll just do a little bit of the coda. I'll do the coda part of it, just sort of playing all even, no real vibrato on anything. It's got some main note. And now I'll add a little shimmer. Okay, so I don't know if that comes through, but to me it gives it a lot more life, a lot more interest. It's definitely harder to control, but that's part of our practicing. We spend most of our time doing things like that. I know you might think you spend most of your time working the fingers out. No, that's really easy. The hard bit is all the interpretive stuff, the dynamics, the vibrato, the colors, and flexibility and suppleness of everything. That's a lifetime, but it works if we get started on it right away. More on vibrato, the very last note. It depends on if I ended it somewhat softly, you can end it loudly, and then your vibrato would be different. But we don't necessarily want to send false signals by mixing the two. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to end loudly, usually we would use a slightly faster vibrato, right? Which I think is a little hysterical. But if you're going to end slowly, also the tendency is for us to use a slower vibrato. But I think in this piece it's a little misplaced, because it's a moving piece, not emotionally moving. I mean, it moves. It's busy. There's lots of notes, and to suddenly come across a very slow, wavy vibrato is a little out of place. I think it's strange. So I try to keep a very shimmering vibrato all the way through. Again, I'm not sure how much is this coming through on camera, but it's just some ideas anyways, you can think about. And then fingerings. So I guess that's a special topic. Here, there's not much you can do. I'm a fan of using every fingering possible that I can think of. Now, as you go higher on the instrument, the options for different fingerings get greater and greater. Like, for instance, the high F sharp, 1, 2, 3 different ways that you can do it at least. The G up there is also 3 different ways, and I use all of them. Now, I know there's probably a little bit of sentiment saying you should use all original fingerings. I'm not quite sure what original fingerings are. I just consider them all fingerings. There are no alternates, they are all fingerings. So, I may use 3 different fingerings for the same note in the same piece. It just depends on where it comes, everything about it, and so on. Now, that means that when I'm practicing scales, when I'm practicing etudes and so on, I will play them, let's say, 3 different ways to use each fingering and get equally fluent in all of them. So that in the heat of the moment when you're out in the world and sitting in rehearsal and somebody gives you a sheet of paper in the orchestra and says, play this, you know you've got the tools. You can use any of your fingerings because they're all comfortable. They're all original. Does that take a lot more time? Of course it does. But it's really worth it to become fluent in all that. And for instance, like in bar 42, or sorry, the note before bar 42 is a G flat. Well, I actually play that as a harmonic of B. So yes, I just blow it up there. Now it depends on your instrument. Will your instrument allow you to do that? You have to play it differently. But where it appears, it's sort of in a climatic spot. I can use lots of air, and our so-called original fingering for G flat, I F sharp, is just way too high anyways. And so this one happens to be rather nice, and I like the colors of the harmonic fingerings most. In actual fact, if you were to ask me which fingerings do I use the most, the originals or these so-called alternates, I would say alternates, definitely. But it's just a matter of choice, like I said, because at any point in a piece, I want to know I can change and feel just as comfortable with any of them. So if I'm doing a G major scale, I will go up and down, playing 3 different types of F sharp, and then do it again, 3 different types of G, just to get comfortable with all of them. So that's my take on the fingerings. At the very end, of course, you have this pinky polka thing going on. There really isn't a cheat way or anything like that around it, but here's what I do in bar 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, bar 119 to the end. This, or yeah, depending on what you counted in the trio repeat, I didn't count those. So we have B flat A, and go to E, D flat to E. Now that I will slide, but the rest of the notes after that, I play most of them without my pinky down at all, so I just have to put it down for D flat. You have to sort of suss that out, but there's a couple of different ways and where you can avoid sliding down and up. So I just have to do the slide up for the E. Anyway, I think that's pretty much about it. Again, with all of these studies and pieces, you can just spend quite a bit of time discovering, actually, the more you look into them. And that's part of the magic. That's part of the magic of playing any instrument, of studying any piece of music. But let your imagination soar, and then come back to sort of to earth, and you'll formulate your own plan and purpose. Always have that purpose for whatever piece you're going to do, and I promise it's going to feel a lot easier in the hands and on the breath to be able to do that. So good luck.